that road isn't finished yet. To extend that road of tradition into the future, to fulfill its potential, we have to first look back, discern the general direction, and then, informed by our past, we must look forward and dare take the next step beyond where the road currently ends. Venturing off the map, so to speak, entering new territory. To stop where the road of tradition currently stops actually ends the adventure. It brings the whole tradition to a standstill. So according to Jesus, faithfulness doesn't simply permit us to extend that tradition and to seek to fulfill it in unexplored potentials. It requires us to do so. But what does it mean to fulfill the tradition? Jesus answers that question with a whole series of examples taken from the traditions and teachings of Judaism in his day. Each example in his sermon begins with Jesus saying, "You have heard it was said to the men of old, thus and so," which introduces us to a tradition. He refers to the command today, for example, "Thou shalt not kill." We heard Jim McNeil read it for us this morning. Later, he refers to adultery. He refers to swearing oaths, to retaliation. He talks about eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. He refers to traditional teachings about who we should love. Each time, Jesus introduces the tradition under discussion with the words, "You've heard that it was said," and then he says what the tradition is. But then he dares to say, "But I say to you," and with those words, Jesus extends the road of tradition into some uncharted territory, the next step the church must be on. Now, his critics would claim that when he does so, he's abolishing the tradition, that that's an act of destruction and it's disrespect toward the teaching of the elders. But Jesus says he has no intention of relaxing any of the commandments that have led right to this moment. They are there, they are real. But what he's going to do is creatively fulfill the intent of that tradition. And so the tradition said, "Thou shalt not kill." Don't murder. Now that's a good start. I mean, don't you wish people that we read about in the news every day would just follow that straightforward commandment? Just don't murder. Just stop it. Duh. However, the tradition doesn't want us to stop merely at the point of avoiding murdering our neighbors and our families and our school children. As a first step beyond what the tradition required, Jesus says, root out the anger that precedes the physical violence that leads to murder. A second step, he says, is deal with the verbal violence of name-calling. Name-calling exacerbates the anger that precedes the physical violence that leads to murder. I believe Jesus would have us put an end to the cyberbullying on social media. Jesus would have us put an end to the ad hominem attacks of our political debates. Jesus would put an end to that calling your adversary a fool and so forth that has become so popular and is printed in every media. It even shows up in the Sunday funnies. For God's sake, in Jesus' name, cut out the name calling. Stop calling other people fools just because you disagree with them. Let's show some respect. Let's show some common decency. And then a third step. Jesus urges his followers to engage in what Brian McLaren calls preemptive reconciliation. In other words, whenever we detect there's a breach in our relationships, we don't need to determine who's at fault. We just need to do something about it. The intent of biblical tradition isn't merely to prove that you're the one who's in the right. No, the goal is to be in a right relationship. So Jesus encourages us, when you know there's a breach in your relationship, quickly and deal with it proactively. Seek reconciliation, because it's not about being right. It's about being in that right relationship. That's the intent of the tradition all along. Avoiding murder, that's just the starting point. Jesus takes us deeper into what makes the murder arise. What is it that's gone wrong in our lives? The kind of preemptive reconciliation that Jesus teaches in this part of his Sermon on the Mount could help us avoid some of the chain reaction of offense leading to revenge, and then a counter-offense that leads to more violence, and that leads to murder. And it's the thing that keeps our court systems busy, and it keeps our prison systems full. Jim McNeil, the bailiff of our district court, read these words for us. Make friends quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you'll never get out till you've paid the last penny. Court costs and fines and fees build up very quickly in our system of justice. Until they're all paid, there may still be a warrant out for your arrest just because you're in arrears with the court costs. So reconcile with your brother, with your sister, with your neighbor, with your colleague. Reconcile. It will go better for everybody in the end. Again, here's how Eugene Peterson puts it in his book called The Message. You say you're out on the street and an old enemy accosts you. Don't lose a minute. Make the first move. Make things right with him. After all, if you leave the first move to him, knowing his track record, you're likely to end up in court, maybe even in jail. And if that happens, you're not going to get out without paying a stiff fine. So I guess we could say that Jesus undermines the tradition by the very fact of making it stronger, making it real, applying it to everyday relationships and behaviors, showing us how we can get it done in the real world. Not pie in the sky and the sweet by and by, but here in our daily lives. So let's follow his lead and become reconcilers, become bridge builders, become peacemakers. Okay? Okay.